The cruelest lies are not the ones strangers whisper, but the ones spoken by the person you once trusted with your heart. The words echoed through Rosalie Ashford's fading thoughts as the great bells of Blackthorn Palace tolled beneath a cold silver moon. They rang not for a celebration, nor for the birth of an heir, but for the quiet passing of a Luna whom history had already judged. Servants lowered their heads without tears. Nobles exchanged solemn glances that concealed relief more than sorrow. For years they had called her barren, cursed, unworthy of the Alpha King's bloodline. They had watched her endure endless whispers, endless remedies, endless humiliations disguised as concern. Even now, as the candles surrounding her chamber flickered against polished stone walls, no one questioned whether the accusations had ever been true. They simply accepted the story they had been given. Somewhere beyond the heavy oak doors stood Alpha King Darius Blackthorn. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in black royal armor beneath a crimson cloak, he looked every inch the ruler his kingdom admired. Yet he did not enter. His silence weighed heavier than any spoken accusation. Rosalie closed her eyes one final time, her heart carrying a grief deeper than loneliness. She had once carried his child beneath her heart, a secret stolen before she ever found the courage to share it. She had buried that dream alone while the world insisted she had never been capable of becoming a mother. The truth disappeared with her, and so did every hope she had protected. Darkness welcomed her with unexpected peace. Then everything shattered. A sharp breath filled her lungs. Warm sunlight touched her face. The scent of lavender drifted through an open window instead of candle smoke. Rosalie's eyes flew open. She was no longer lying inside the chamber where she had taken her final breath. Instead, she found herself seated before an ornate mirror inside her younger bedchamber, dressed in a pale sage gown she had not worn in years. Her trembling fingers reached for the polished wood of the dressing table. It was solid. Real. Outside, birds sang instead of morning bells. Her heartbeat thundered. As memory collided with impossible reality. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Lady Rosalie, a maid called gently through the door. The royal physician has arrived. His Majesty requests your presence immediately. Rosalie's blood ran cold. She remembered this morning with perfect clarity. This was the day everything had begun to unravel. The day the physician would publicly declare that she could never bear children. The day sympathy turned into suspicion. The day pity transformed into contempt. In her first life, she had begged through tears for another examination, another chance, another ounce of faith. No one had believed her. This time she stood calmly. Her reflection stared back with the same beautiful face framed by long golden brown hair, but the innocence inside those eyes had vanished forever. Moments later she entered the royal audience chamber. Ministers, advisors, noblewomen, and guards filled the room. At its center stood Darius, his commanding presence impossible to ignore. His dark hair rested across his shoulders, his expression carved from stone. When their eyes briefly met, something unfamiliar stirred behind his composed gaze, a strange ache that vanished before either of them could understand it. The royal physician unfolded a parchment with ceremonial precision. After careful examination, he announced, Lady Rosalie Ashford suffers from a condition that will prevent her from producing an heir for the throne. Murmurs spread across the chamber exactly as they had years before. Every whisper sounded painfully familiar. Darius remained silent. In another lifetime that silence had broken her. Today it changed nothing. Before anyone could offer hollow comfort or hidden judgment, Rosalie reached slowly toward her left hand. She slipped off the silver lunar ring that symbolized her bond to the Alpha King. Gasps echoed across the hall. She stepped forward with quiet dignity and placed the ring upon the marble steps beneath the throne. Then Your Majesty deserves complete freedom, she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her heart. I release you from every promise that once bound us. I will not bear your heir, and I will no longer carry your blame. Silence swept across the royal audience chamber with a force no command could have achieved. Every noble present stared at the silver lunar ring resting on the polished marble as though it were something impossible, something the kingdom itself refused to understand. Rosalie Ashford had not begged. She had not wept. She had not defended herself against the physician's verdict. Instead, she had surrendered the one title she had spent years trying to honor. Even the servants standing along the walls forgot to breathe. They had expected another heartbreaking plea, another promise that she would continue trying to become the mother the kingdom demanded. Instead, they witnessed something entirely different. They watched a woman choose her dignity before anyone else could strip it away. Darius Blackthorne remained motionless upon the raised platform, his broad shoulders hidden beneath the heavy crimson royal cloak that flowed behind his black armor. His sharp features betrayed nothing, yet something inside him shifted with unsettling force. His wolf stirred restlessly beneath the calm mask he had perfected over years of ruling. It was not anger. It was not relief. It was something deeper, stranger, like watching a familiar road suddenly disappear beneath his feet. Before reason could catch up, his instincts urged him to stop her. He did not understand why. Rosalie lowered her head with quiet grace, offered the respectful bow expected before the throne, then turned away without waiting for permission. Her footsteps echoed steadily through the vast chamber. Each step carried her farther from the future that had once consumed her every waking thought. No voice ordered her to stop. No hand reached for hers. Yet with every foot she placed upon the cold stone floor, Darius felt an invisible thread stretching tighter between them. His fingers curled almost unconsciously around the carved arm of the throne. The sensation disappeared the instant she crossed the towering doors. A sudden emptiness settled inside his chest, so brief that he questioned whether it had existed at all. Around him the whispers quickly returned. Some nobles praised her composure. Others quietly agreed that the kingdom deserved a fertile Luna. Several advisors had already begun exchanging cautious glances, calculating which noble families possessed unmarried daughters suitable for a royal alliance. Their practical discussions sounded distant, muffled, almost meaningless. Darius heard every word without listening to any of them. His gaze remained fixed upon the abandoned ring lying beneath the throne. At the same moment, Rosalie stepped beyond the palace gates into crisp morning air. The familiar gardens stretched before her exactly as they had years ago, vibrant with blooming roses and towering ash trees. In her first life she had wandered these paths in tears, desperately searching for some explanation that would make her suffering bearable. This time she did not stop to grieve. She walked with purpose. Every flower, every fountain, every stone path reminded her that destiny had not yet hardened into history. She still had time. She still had choices. She would never again allow another person's judgment to define her worth. As her carriage rolled away from Blackthorn Palace, she glanced only once toward the towering castle behind her. The towering walls looked magnificent beneath the sunlight, but they no longer felt like home. Instead they resembled a place where countless quiet wounds had been mistaken for loyalty. She whispered a promise that no one else could hear. I will not relive that life. The horses continued down the winding road toward Ashford Manor, where her widowed Aunt Eleanor had lived in peaceful seclusion for years. Few people remembered the old estate hidden beyond miles of rolling meadows and ancient forests. That was precisely why Rosalie chose it. There she could think. There she could search for the truth without the endless eyes of court watching her every movement. Behind her, inside the palace, Darius finally descended from the throne after the chamber had nearly emptied. He walked alone toward the silver ring. For reasons he could not explain, he found himself unable to leave it where it rested. As soon as his fingers closed around the cool metal, a blinding image flashed through his mind. He saw moonlight pouring through stained glass. He heard someone quietly crying. He felt warm tears falling onto his own hands. Then the vision vanished as suddenly as it had come. His heartbeat quickened. He stared down at the ring, unsettled by emotions that belonged to no memory he recognized. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, his wolf let out a silent, aching call toward the woman who had already decided she would never again surrender her future to a fate that had once destroyed them both. The journey to Ashford Manor lasted nearly 6 hours, yet Rosalie welcomed every mile that placed distance between herself and Blackthorn Palace. Rolling green fields stretched beneath a bright spring sky while gentle winds carried the scent of fresh earth through the open carriage window. The peaceful countryside looked exactly as it had before her first life unraveled, untouched by the sorrow she alone remembered. Every familiar landmark awakened another fragment of memory. A weathered stone bridge reminded her of the afternoon she had first believed happiness was finally within reach. A quiet stream recalled evenings when she had imagined children laughing beside its banks. Those dreams no longer brought comfort. They carried questions that refused to fade. If she had truly been barren, why had she remembered holding a tiny knitted blanket against her heart while whispering promises to a child no one else had known existed? The memory was not a dream. It was too vivid, too complete. She remembered the morning sickness hidden behind polite smiles. She remembered secretly measuring the passing weeks. Most of all, she remembered placing both hands over her stomach while believing the future could still be kind. The carriage finally rolled through the weathered iron gates of Ashford Manor, where ivy climbed the pale stone walls and ancient oak trees shaded the quiet estate. Waiting on the front steps stood Lady Eleanor Ashford, her silver hair gathered neatly beneath a simple bonnet. Although age had softened her posture, wisdom still shone clearly within her gentle blue eyes. The moment Rosalie stepped from the carriage, Eleanor embraced her without asking a single question. Somehow that silent welcome felt kinder than every carefully chosen word offered inside the royal palace. During supper, Eleanor noticed the unusual calm that surrounded her niece. Rosalie answered every question politely, yet her thoughts remained elsewhere. Late that evening, after the household had fallen asleep, she carried a lantern into the old family library. Dust floated through narrow beams of moonlight while shelves filled with forgotten journals surrounded her. In her first life she had never searched this room because she had believed the physicians knew more than ancient books. She would never make that mistake again. Hour after hour she examined weathered family records until one fragile leather journal slipped from a shelf as though waiting for her hands alone. The faded inscription read, "Midwife Eliza Hartwell, Royal Birth Records and Private Observations." Rosalie's heartbeat quickened. She carefully opened the brittle pages, discovering handwritten notes describing unusual pregnancies, rare healing bloodlines, and confidential deliveries entrusted to women whose names could never appear in official records. Then her eyes stopped upon a familiar date. It was the exact month she had remembered quietly counting beneath her gowns. Her fingers trembled as she continued reading. The entry did not mention her by name, but it described a young Luna carrying an unusually strong royal heartbeat despite physicians insisting she could never conceive. Beside the passage someone had later drawn thick black ink across several lines, attempting to erase whatever had originally been written. Rosalie stared at the damaged page in stunned silence. Someone had deliberately hidden the truth years before she ever realized it existed. Before she could gather her thoughts, another folded piece of parchment slipped from between the pages and drifted onto the wooden floor. It contained only a few hurried words written in fading ink. "If anything happens to me, find Martha Bell in Willow Creek. She knows what the palace chose to forget." Rosalie whispered the name aloud, testing it against memories that slowly returned. Martha Bell. The elderly village midwife who had vanished shortly after Rosalie's illness in her first life. Everyone had claimed the woman simply retired. Now that explanation felt far too convenient. Hundreds of miles away, inside the royal palace, Darius stood alone upon a stone balcony overlooking the moonlit courtyard. Sleep had refused to come. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the faint sound of a woman crying without ever seeing her face. His wolf paced restlessly inside him, ignoring every attempt to regain control. Suddenly he found himself speaking into the empty night before realizing the words had escaped without thought. Rosalie. The single name echoed across the silent courtyard. He frowned, unsettled by the unfamiliar ache tightening around his heart. For the first time in years, the Alpha King questioned whether the story he had accepted without doubt had ever been the whole truth. Morning sunlight painted soft golden patterns across the hills surrounding Ashford Manor, but Rosalie found little comfort in the beauty outside her window. She had spent the entire night studying midwife Eliza Hartwell's journal, tracing every faded sentence as though each word might restore a piece of the life she had lost. The hidden note mentioning Martha Bell rested safely inside her pocket. It was the first real clue that someone besides herself had known the truth. She refused to waste another day. Before sunrise she dressed in a simple traveling gown, braided her long golden brown hair beneath a modest bonnet, and quietly prepared a small carriage for the journey to Willow Creek. Lady Eleanor watched from the front porch with calm understanding. "Some roads only reveal themselves when we stop fearing where they lead," she said gently. Rosalie embraced her aunt with grateful eyes. "I do not know what I will find," she admitted. "But I know what I can no longer ignore." The carriage rolled through peaceful countryside where farmers welcomed the new season and children chased one another beside weathered fences. The ordinary happiness around her made the memories of her first life feel even heavier. She remembered traveling these same roads years ago after another disappointing appointment with Palace physicians. Back then she had believed every diagnosis without question. She had blamed herself for every silent dinner, every disappointed glance, every lonely night. Now those memories no longer felt like shame. They felt like carefully constructed lies. Hours later she reached the quiet village of Willow Creek, a place small enough that everyone recognized unfamiliar faces. An elderly shopkeeper smiled warmly when Rosalie asked about Martha Bell. His expression quickly changed. "Miss Bell still lives near the old chapel," he answered softly. "She rarely receives visitors anymore." Rosalie thanked him and followed the narrow path lined with wildflowers until a modest stone cottage appeared beneath towering maple trees. She had barely lifted her hand to knock before the front door slowly opened. A frail woman with silver hair studied her face in stunned silence. Martha Bell's weathered hands trembled against the wooden doorframe. Tears immediately filled her faded blue eyes. "Moon above," she whispered. "You are alive." Rosalie felt her breath catch. "You know who I am?" Martha nodded slowly, then glanced nervously toward the empty road before stepping aside. "Come inside quickly. There are conversations that should never be held where strangers can listen." The little cottage smelled of dried herbs and fresh bread. Shelves overflowed with old medical books, handwritten ledgers, and carefully labeled glass jars. Rosalie noticed several royal seals hidden beneath folded cloths as though someone had tried to erase every connection to the palace. Martha poured warm tea with shaking hands before finally meeting Rosalie's eyes again. "I prayed every year that you might somehow learn the truth," she said quietly. "But I never imagined fate would send you back to my door." Rosalie leaned forward, her heart pounding. "Please tell me one thing. Was I truly unable to have children?" The old midwife closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her wrinkled cheek. "No, my dear. Never." The room fell perfectly still. Rosalie could not speak. Martha reached beneath a locked cabinet and carefully removed a small linen bundle tied with a faded blue ribbon. Inside rested a tiny pair of hand-knitted baby booties, no larger than the palm of Rosalie's hand. The sight struck her with impossible force. Memories flooded back like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. She remembered knitting them alone beside a palace window while secretly smiling at the future. She remembered hiding them before anyone could see. She remembered believing she would one day place them into Darius's hands. Tears filled her eyes, but she remained silent. Martha gently placed the tiny booties into Rosalie's trembling hands. "You carried hope," the old woman whispered. Someone inside the palace made certain that hope would never be welcomed. Hundreds of miles away, Darius stood inside the royal training grounds, attempting to quiet the restless wolf within him. Every swing of his sword felt strangely hollow. Then, without warning, the air shimmered around him with another brief vision. He saw a pair of impossibly small knitted booties resting beneath moonlight while a woman's gentle voice whispered, "Our child will know kindness." The image vanished before he could reach it. His sword slipped from his grasp and struck the ground with a sharp metallic echo. For the first time in his life, the Alpha King feared that the memories haunting his soul belonged to a truth someone had stolen from them both. Rosalie sat in silence long after Martha Bell's words faded into the quiet warmth of the little cottage. The tiny knitted booties rested gently in her hands, and with every passing heartbeat another forgotten memory rose from the shadows of her soul. She remembered secretly choosing the soft blue yarn because Darius had once confessed that the summer sky above Blackthorn Lake was his favorite sight in the kingdom. She remembered smiling as she stitched every thread with trembling hope, imagining the day she would surprise him with the news that they were finally becoming a family. Then another memory surfaced, darker than the first. She remembered the morning after she drank a cup of herbal tea prepared by one of the palace attendants. Soon afterward, an unbearable weakness had swept through her body. The palace physician had arrived unusually quickly, speaking with confidence before completing any examination. He had declared that nature itself had failed her. She had believed him because she had trusted the people serving the crown. Now she understood that trust had been carefully manipulated. Martha watched the realization settle across Rosalie's face before quietly opening another weathered ledger. Several pages had been torn away, but one fragile document remained hidden inside the cover. It contained a list of medicinal herbs delivered to the palace infirmary nearly 5 years earlier. Most names appeared ordinary until Rosalie noticed one unfamiliar entry circled in faded ink. Silver thorn blossom. Martha lowered her voice. That herb is harmless to most people. But during the earliest weeks of pregnancy, it can quietly end a life before anyone realizes what has happened. The symptoms often resemble a natural loss. Few physicians even question it. Rosalie felt the room sway around her. The painful emptiness she had carried for years had never been fate. Someone had chosen it for her. She drew a slow breath, refusing to let grief consume her again. She had already lived one lifetime as a victim. She would spend this one uncovering every hidden truth. Who ordered it? She asked. Martha hesitated. I never saw the order itself. Supplies arrived through the royal infirmary, but one person visited more often than anyone else. Rosalie already knew the answer before the name was spoken. Lady Celine Whitmore. Martha's silence confirmed everything. At nearly the same moment, inside Blackthorn Palace, Lady Celine stood beside a tall stained glass window overlooking the royal gardens. She had expected news of Rosalie's tearful return to Ashford Manor, broken and humiliated exactly as before. Instead, a trusted maid delivered a very different report. Your Grace, the young servant said carefully, Lady Rosalie has not remained in mourning. She has been traveling through nearby villages asking questions about old palace records. Celine's pleasant smile disappeared for only an instant before returning with practiced elegance. Questions, she repeated softly. About what? No one knows for certain. But she visited Willow Creek this morning. Celine's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the porcelain teacup she held. Willow Creek. There was only one reason anyone connected to the palace would ever travel there. Martha Bell. The old midwife had remained alive far longer than expected. Celine turned calmly toward the window, hiding the concern that briefly crossed her face. History was no longer following the path she remembered. Rosalie had changed. That meant every carefully arranged plan might begin unraveling sooner than expected. She could not allow forgotten witnesses to become living evidence. Yet she also understood that acting too quickly would invite suspicion. She would need patience. Across the kingdom, Darius dismissed another council meeting after finding himself unable to focus on matters of trade or border agreements. Every official report blurred together while the same unanswered question returned again and again. Why had Rosalie looked relieved instead of heartbroken when she removed the lunar ring? That expression haunted him far more than her departure. It had not been the face of someone surrendering. It had been the face of someone escaping. His royal advisor approached carefully. Your Majesty, shall we begin discussing potential candidates for a future Luna? Darius answered without looking away from the palace gardens. No. The single word surprised even him. After a long silence he added, not until I understand why everything suddenly feels wrong. Far away, Rosalie prepared to leave Martha's cottage with the journal, the booties, and the list of medicinal herbs safely hidden inside her travel bag. As she stepped onto the quiet village road, an unfamiliar rider slowed his dark horse across the street and stared at her with unmistakable recognition. Before Rosalie could speak, the stranger removed his hat and said in a hushed voice, "My lady, someone has been searching for you since dawn, and I do not believe they wish to find you for a kind reason." Rosalie's pulse remained steady despite the stranger's warning. In her first life, fear had often decided her next step. In this life, caution would guide her instead. She studied the rider carefully. He appeared to be in his early 40s, dressed in the plain traveling clothes of a merchant rather than the polished attire of a noble. There was sincerity in his tired gray eyes, but there was also urgency. "Who are you?" she asked calmly. The man bowed his head. "My name is Nathan Carter. I once delivered supplies to the Royal Infirmary. Years ago, I saw things I should never have seen. When I learned you had come to Willow Creek, I knew history was beginning to move again." Rosalie felt every word settle heavily inside her mind. "Who is searching for me?" Nathan glanced toward the road behind him before lowering his voice. "People loyal to Lady Selene have been asking questions since yesterday. They are trying to learn whether anyone still remembers the old records." Martha Bell quietly stepped outside the cottage, her expression filled with concern. "Then we have less time than I hoped." She disappeared inside for a brief moment before returning with a small wooden box wrapped in linen. "I kept this hidden because I believed no one would ever believe the truth," she said. "Now it belongs to you." Rosalie carefully opened the box. Inside rested a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon surrounding a tiny sapphire. The jewelry looked ordinary until she turned it over. Engraved on the back were 4 words that stole the air from her lungs. "For our little star." Her fingertips trembled against the cool metal. Another forgotten memory surfaced. She remembered Darius smiling quietly one peaceful evening beside the palace fireplace. He had handed her the pendant before they were even married. He had laughed softly while telling her that one day they would give it to their first child as a family keepsake. Tears gathered in her eyes, not because the memory caused pain, but because it revealed a version of Darius she had nearly forgotten. Before suspicion and silence had grown between them, there had once been kindness. She closed the pendant inside her palm. "Thank you," she whispered. Nathan removed a folded map from his saddlebag and spread it across the hood of the carriage. One location had been marked with dark ink. "Several miles north of here stands St. Hilaire's Chapel. Few people visit it anymore, but beneath the old sanctuary there is a small memorial crypt where members of the royal household once placed private records that could not remain inside the palace. If any proof survived, it may still be there." Martha nodded slowly. "I heard the same stories many years ago." Rosalie looked toward the distant hills where the abandoned chapel stood beyond dense forests. Every instinct told her that another piece of the truth waited there. At Blackthorn Palace, Darius spent another restless evening inside the royal archives. Dust-covered shelves filled with generations of royal documents, yet one particular cabinet caught his attention. Records from 5 years earlier contained an unusual gap. Medical reports from an entire season had disappeared without explanation. The chief archivist frowned in confusion. "That cannot be correct, Your Majesty. Those files were once here." Darius gently closed the empty drawer, his uneasiness deepening. "Who authorized their removal?" According to the remaining registry, the archivist answered after checking another ledger. The request carried the seal of the royal physician and the signature of Lady Selene Whitmore, who claimed she was assisting with administrative matters during the Queen Mother's illness. Darius remained silent, but his wolf stirred violently inside him. The explanation felt wrong in ways he could not explain. That same evening, Lady Selene stood inside her private chambers watching rain clouds gather beyond the palace windows. A messenger arrived carrying troubling news. Rosalie had not returned directly to Ashford Manor. She had continued searching. Selene dismissed the messenger with a composed smile, but once she was alone, she slowly unfolded an old letter hidden inside her desk. After reading it one final time, she held it above the fireplace until the parchment curled into glowing ash. "The past should have stayed buried," she murmured softly. Miles away, Rosalie guided her carriage toward the lonely road leading to St. Hilaire's chapel. As twilight settled across the countryside, the ancient stone bell tower appeared between towering pines. Just as the carriage reached the chapel gates, a sudden gust of wind pushed open the weathered wooden doors with a long echoing creak, revealing a single lantern already burning inside, as though someone had been waiting for her arrival. The ancient chapel welcomed Rosalie with a silence that felt older than memory itself. Dust floated through narrow beams of fading sunlight pouring across cracked stone floors, while the single lantern hanging near the altar swayed gently although no breeze touched the air inside. Someone had lit it only moments earlier. Rosalie instinctively placed one hand over the leather satchel carrying midwife Eliza Hartwell's journal and the tiny knitted booties. She stepped forward carefully, every footfall echoing beneath the weathered ceiling. "You came," an elderly voice said softly from the shadows. An old priest emerged from a side corridor, his white hair glowing beneath the lantern light. His worn robes showed years of faithful service, yet his steady eyes revealed that he had been expecting her. "Father Benedict," Rosalie whispered, recognizing him from distant childhood memories. He had once blessed her wedding to Darius before quietly retiring to this forgotten chapel. The old priest smiled with gentle sadness. "There are promises that survive even when kingdoms forget them." He motioned for her to follow him beyond the altar to a narrow stone staircase descending beneath the chapel. The air grew cooler as they entered a hidden chamber lined with shelves filled with sealed wooden boxes bearing faded royal crests. These were entrusted to the chapel whenever families wished to protect certain truths from politics, Father Benedict explained. Most have never been opened again. He stopped before one weathered chest marked with the crest of House Blackthorn beside the symbol of the full moon. Reaching into his robe, he withdrew a small iron key hanging from a leather cord around his neck. This box was delivered 5 years ago with strict instructions that no one except the rightful owner should ever see its contents. The lock clicked open. Inside rested a folded ivory blanket embroidered with silver thread, a tiny silver bracelet engraved with the royal crest, and beneath them a sealed envelope bearing Darius's unmistakable handwriting. Rosalie stared in disbelief. Her trembling fingers carefully broke the untouched wax seal. The letter had never been opened. She recognized every graceful stroke of his handwriting immediately. "My dearest Rosalie, if you are reading this, then our child has already arrived safely. I know you wanted the surprise to wait until after the Royal Council meeting, but I could not resist preparing something worthy of our little miracle. Whether our child inherits your gentle heart or my stubborn spirit, I promise to become the father they deserve. I promise our family will always come before my crown. I love you more than any title this kingdom has ever given me." Tears blurred the words before she reached the signature. Darius had written the letter before everything fell apart, before suspicion poisoned their marriage, before anyone convinced him she had never conceived. The hope in every sentence shattered the final illusion that he had always doubted her. Father Benedict quietly spoke. The letter was delivered here by a palace messenger with instructions that it be presented after the royal birth. No messenger ever returned for it. Rosalie closed her eyes, overwhelmed not by bitterness but by heartbreaking possibility. Somewhere along the path of her first life, someone had deliberately separated two people who had once believed in the same future. At Blackthorn Palace, Darius stood alone in the royal library as another violent wave of unfamiliar memories swept through him. This time he saw Rosalie laughing beside a fireplace while knitting tiny blue booties. He heard himself telling her that their child would never question whether they were loved. The vision disappeared, leaving only a crushing ache inside his chest. Without hesitation he summoned his captain of the guard. "Prepare horses immediately," he ordered. "I am leaving the palace." "Where are you going, Your Majesty?" the captain asked. Darius looked toward the western horizon where the setting sun disappeared beyond distant forests. "To find the answers I should have searched for years ago." At the same time, many miles away, Lady Selene received another report from one of her informants. The messenger lowered his voice. "Your Grace, Lady Rosalie has entered St. Hilaire's chapel." For the first time in years, Selene's composed expression cracked. She knew exactly what remained hidden beneath that forgotten sanctuary. If Rosalie opened the wrong box, the carefully buried truth would no longer belong to the past. It would become the future. As Rosalie carefully lifted the ivory blanket from the chest, a small folded parchment slipped onto the stone floor. Across its front, written in elegant script she instantly recognized, were 6 simple words that stopped her breath. For the day our child is named. Rosalie's hands trembled as she unfolded the final parchment. The elegant handwriting remained unmistakably Darius's, every graceful stroke carrying a future that had never been allowed to exist. Inside was a list of names he had carefully written weeks before the happiness of their family had been stolen. If our child is a daughter, perhaps Clara, after your mother. If our child is a son, perhaps Adrian, because courage should never be louder than kindness. And if our child chooses neither path, then we will wait together until they tell us who they truly are. Whatever their name becomes, they will always know they were wanted before they were ever born. Rosalie pressed the letter against her heart as tears quietly filled her eyes. She had carried bitterness for so many years that she had forgotten how deeply Darius had once dreamed beside her. The memories returning to her no longer showed only pain. They revealed a marriage that had been slowly separated by deception rather than destroyed by indifference alone. Father Benedict gently rested a weathered hand upon the old wooden chest. Love can be silenced by fear, he said softly, but truth has remarkable patience. Before Rosalie could answer, hurried footsteps echoed from above. Nathan Carter descended the narrow staircase, breathing heavily after rushing through the chapel grounds. "My lady," he said, struggling to steady his voice, "riders from the palace have entered the valley. They are asking whether anyone has seen a noblewoman traveling alone." Rosalie exchanged a calm glance with Father Benedict. Unlike her first life, panic no longer ruled her decisions. She carefully placed the letters, the blanket, the tiny bracelet, and the keepsakes back inside her satchel. "Then we leave before they arrive," she said quietly. Nathan hesitated. "There is something else. The riders are not led by Lady Celine's household." Rosalie frowned. "Then whose banner do they carry?" Nathan answered, "The royal crest itself." At that same moment, miles away along the winding mountain road, Darius guided his black stallion through the dense pine forest with a small escort following at a respectful distance. Every instinct urged him forward. He had abandoned protocol for the first time since becoming Alpha King, leaving ministers confused and advisors without explanation. The strange visions haunting him had grown stronger with every passing hour. He no longer questioned whether they meant something. He questioned only how many years he had ignored them. His captain finally rode beside him. "Your Majesty, if I may ask, what exactly are we searching for?" Darius kept his eyes fixed upon the distant hills. "Not what," he replied. "Who?" The captain remained silent. There was something different in the king's voice, something less commanding and more human than anyone at court had heard in years. Back inside Blackthorn Palace, Lady Celine stood before the royal council with flawless composure as though nothing had disturbed her carefully ordered world. Yet beneath the calm smile, every calculation had begun to change. News arrived that Darius himself had unexpectedly left the capital without informing the council of his destination. That had never happened before. Worse still, the king had requested access to forgotten medical archives before his departure. She realized the timeline had shifted beyond anything she could easily predict. For the first time since Rosalie's return, uncertainty entered her plans. She dismissed the council gracefully before quietly instructing a trusted servant to deliver sealed invitations for an emergency gathering of several influential noble families. If the truth could no longer remain buried, then she would bury it beneath louder accusations before anyone had the chance to listen. As twilight settled across St. Hilaire's chapel, Rosalie stepped outside carrying the satchel over her shoulder. The evening breeze stirred the ancient trees surrounding the sanctuary. Across the valley, the distant sound of approaching horses echoed through the fading light. Nathan looked toward the road and whispered, "They are almost here." Rosalie lifted her eyes toward the horizon, expecting another test of courage. Instead, she saw a solitary rider break away from the others, his crimson cloak flowing behind black royal armor that caught the last rays of the setting sun. Even from a distance, she recognized him immediately, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, fate had brought them together before either of them was ready for the truth. The moment Darius reined in his horse before St. Hilaire's chapel, the restless ache inside him fell into an unexpected silence. For days his instincts had driven him across the kingdom without explanation. Now, standing only a few yards from Rosalie, he finally understood why. She was not merely the woman who had once worn the lunar ring. She was the missing piece of every dream that had haunted his nights. Rosalie remained still, the leather satchel resting against her shoulder. She met his gaze without fear, without anger, and without the desperate hope that had once lived inside her heart. That quiet confidence unsettled him more deeply than any accusation ever could. Darius slowly stepped down from his horse, leaving his sword untouched at his side. His escort remained behind, sensing that this meeting belonged to no one else. For several long moments neither of them spoke. The evening wind carried the scent of pine through the valley while the chapel bell gently swayed above them. Finally Darius broke the silence. "I have been searching for answers," he said, his voice lower than usual. Rosalie looked at him calmly. "Then you came to the right place. The answers were never hidden from fate. They were hidden from us." Father Benedict quietly emerged from the chapel carrying the old wooden chest. Without speaking, he placed it between them. Darius frowned as his eyes settled upon the familiar royal crest burned into the lid. When the priest opened it, the ivory blanket, the tiny silver bracelet, and the carefully folded letters lay exactly as Rosalie had found them. Darius reached for the first letter with uncertain hands. As he read his own forgotten words promising to become the father their child deserved, the memories that had haunted him for days finally crashed together into one unbearable truth. He remembered writing every sentence. He remembered hiding the keepsakes so they would become a joyful surprise after the birth. He remembered believing their future had already begun. His knees weakened beneath the weight of realization. "There was a child," he whispered, barely able to breathe. Rosalie answered with quiet honesty. There was hope. Tears gathered in Darius's eyes as he looked at the tiny knitted booties resting beside the bracelet. "I believed." His voice failed him. "I believed you could never." Rosalie gently finished the sentence for him. "Because someone made certain you would." Father Benedict handed Darius the remaining documents recovered from the chapel and Martha Bell's testimony describing the hidden medical records and the shipment of silver thorn blossom. Nathan Carter added his own account of the deliveries made to the Royal Infirmary years earlier. Piece by piece, the carefully constructed deception collapsed beneath evidence that could no longer be dismissed. Darius closed his eyes, overwhelmed not only by grief but by the knowledge that his silence had allowed another person's lies to become Rosalie's burden. Slowly, before his guards, before the priest, before every witness gathered at the chapel, the Alpha King lowered himself onto one knee. No royal custom required it. No law demanded it. He did it because his heart could no longer remain above the woman he had failed to protect. "Rosalie Ashford," he said with quiet sincerity, "I cannot ask you to erase what happened. I cannot ask you to trust words that should have been spoken years ago. But I can promise that truth will no longer kneel before power while I wear this crown." Rosalie's eyes softened, yet she did not reach for him. "Then begin with justice," she replied. "Not for me alone, but for every woman whose voice was ignored because someone more powerful chose convenience over compassion." Darius rose with renewed purpose. Before leaving the chapel, he ordered his captain to summon the royal council, the physicians, the archivists, and every noble connected to the hidden records. He announced that all medical investigations would be reopened, that every witness would receive royal protection, and that new laws would forbid coercion, deception, or discrimination against any Omega based on fertility. When the procession departed, Rosalie did not return beside the king. She chose to ride her own carriage back toward Ashford Manor, carrying her future in her own hands rather than behind someone else's throne. Darius watched until she disappeared beyond the hills, understanding that forgiveness could never be commanded. It could only be earned through years of faithful action. As dawn broke over the kingdom the next morning, church bells echoed across towns and villages, not to celebrate a royal heir, but to announce a new royal decree declaring that every citizen, regardless of status or circumstance, deserved dignity, truth, and the freedom to choose their own future. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, Rosalie smiled not because she had been chosen by a king, but because she had finally chosen herself.